Welcome back to Embracing Tradition. Today I want to talk about why this lifelong Protestant converted to the Catholic Church. Now, I have already done a conversion video on this channel, but that was before I was actually brought into the church. And now that I have been baptized into the Catholic Church, I would like to kind of rehash my story. A little bit of my upbringing. I'll give you a little bit of backstory. I was raised independent fundamental Baptist, and if you're not familiar with what that is a very strict version of being a Baptist.
Let me tell you something, bozo! They'll be selling Frosties in hell for this boy! Put on a pair of pink underwear!
You think I'm preaching too hard? You have lost your mind!
Women could not wear pants. The King James Version of the Bible was seen as the only inspired version of God. You know, if I remember correctly, some of our sister churches actually had an NIV burning at one point. So that's a little backstory for where I come from. In this version of Baptists, salvation is seen as you say a prayer, 1, 2, 3, repeat after me, and you're granted salvation. You don't have to fear hell. And it sounds nice, it sounds easy, and it sounds simple. But when you're actually living within this world, they are very legalistic. And so they add a lot of rules to what it means to be a faithful Christian. And they would caveat if you're a real Christian based on how you live your life and how you follow these rules. Now, some of them would say that if you didn't pray this prayer and mean it, and you're living in a certain way that goes against, what they would consider living a godly Christian life, that you are not a real Christian. You didn't really mean it when you said the prayer. Other flavors of this denomination actually teach that you can live however you want. It doesn't really matter how you live your life. They would call it a backslidden Christian, which there's no such thing in the scriptures, just to be clear. But they would have this category of Christian that is not faithful to Jesus Christ. They just live however they want. They would live worldly, if that's a better word for it. So I experienced both flavors of this. It's a weird dichotomy to live in, but so I would find myself, I'm a very scrupulous person. And so I would find myself when I wasn't living up to the expectation, when I was struggling to, not sin, I would find myself questioning whether or not I was sincere when I asked Jesus into my heart. This led to a lot of guilt, over scrutinizing my faith, over scrutinizing my Christian walk. And on top of that, it wasn't just living a godly life according to what the scriptures say is a godly life. It was a lot of man-made rules, such as I said before, like we couldn't wear pants. And so if I was struggling with wanting to wear pants, I would really have this internal fight with myself, like, am I really a Christian if I want to wear these worldly clothes? And so that was something I had struggled with for my whole life, just this constant internal battle. And that led to me praying the sinner's prayer millions of times. I have been baptized in the Baptist church no less than 10 times. I have been re-baptized because they see it as if you are not sincere and you need to pray that prayer again, then they need to re-baptize you. Don't ask me why, because it doesn't logically make sense, because they don't believe baptism does anything. It's just kind of an outward profession that you believe in Jesus Christ, which is why I don't think it's a very big deal for them if they actually re-baptize you. So I went to college in one of these independent fundamentalist colleges. And I was not looking to get a degree for anything other than to find a husband. I needed my MRS degree. But needless to say, I did not find my husband within these institutions. So I came home, I got a job, and a friend reached out to me and from one of the independent Baptist colleges that I went to in Jacksonville, Florida. And she told me she knew this guy. And that is actually how I got in contact with my now husband. Very crazy story. We're not talking about that today. But Long distance relationship. He was going to be a missionary to Honduras. He had finished college, and he was also in this independent Baptist movement. Less strict, less cultish than the one I was in, but still the same genre of Protestantism. So I started talking to my husband. We quickly realized, we want to get married. We're done with college. We're ready for this next step in our lives. We were married very quickly. We got married less than a year of dating. And so we started on what they would call deputation. And that is just raising money for support so that you can have money to live on when you go to the actual mission field. We realized a few years into that process that the money just wasn't coming in. We weren't able to raise the support, and we're really feeling like God was closing that door. So my husband became a youth pastor in Houston, Texas for a Southern Baptist church. And while we were in this church, my husband became friends with a gentleman there, and he was a Calvinist. If you don't know what Calvinism is, I'm going to break it down really quick. Calvinism teaches that God elects only a certain few individuals within the world, and only those elect will go to heaven. And within that dichotomy, God saves you against your will. And I don't mean that to misrepresent the Calvinist position, because they will say that your will is involved. But God ultimately has to free your will so that you can exercise your will. They call this regeneration. And we know as Catholics that regeneration happens in the waters of baptism. And so the Reformed, take the term regeneration and they apply it to you before baptism. They believe that the Holy Spirit makes you alive, makes you spiritually alive, able to respond to the gospel. And this part of salvation happens and you're not aware of it. Like, you hear the gospel, God has elected you, so therefore you actually are regenerated. Then you respond to the gospel. Your will is freed to do that. And so not only is he responsible for the elect's salvation, but they hold to something called double predestination. God is just as much damning those who are damned. He's responsible for those who are damned, as he is responsible for those who are going to heaven. And so when my husband first started bringing these topics up and discussing these things with me, I was like, no, that is a monster. I was very, very hostile to this understanding of Christianity, of Protestantism. But at the same time, I was already struggling so much with the easy believism in my own culture of Protestantism that I was just tired. I was just to a point where I almost wanted to just be agnostic. Acknowledge there's a God, acknowledge Jesus exists, and forget about all of these weird practices and beliefs. Because my mind was so tired of just constantly doubting if I was a Christian, constantly doubting all of these things. And so my husband said something to me that allowed me to kind of open myself up to the possibility that Calvinism might be correct. He said to me, I think that this will help you stop doubting your salvation. And I was so desperate to remain a Christian, but to stop having this internal battle with myself, that I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a chance. And so instead of researching all of the things against Calvinism, I started listening to sermons by Calvinists, reading books by Calvinists such as John Piper. And I quickly realized, the way that they describe if you're a Christian is if you have any ounce of desire to be a Christian, any ounce of desire to love God and to be a follower of Jesus Christ, that is proof that you have been elected, that you are chosen by God. And so it was like Martin Luther in the tower, the famous legendary moment for Luther when he says, this is the gospel. I've been freed from the shackles of Rome. This is the gospel, and I'm free. That was my experience. I just felt free to be confident that I was a Christian. Now, I struggled still at the beginning, And I struggled through our whole process of being Calvinist with the problem of evil. Because when you accept that God is completely sovereign over everything that happens, he determines everything. It is ultimately fatalism. He determines everything. You also have to accept that not only does he determine all the good things, like your salvation, but he's also determining all the bad things. And that was a huge contradiction in my mind, something I always struggled with in the back of my head. And it was a really hard thing to process, but at the same time, I just wanted to have this assurance of my salvation. I wanted to know that I was a Christian, that I was going to heaven. And so I embraced it, wholeheartedly embraced it. And I love theology, and Calvinism is a very intellectual side of Protestantism. It's super booky. I don't know another word for that. I'm sure there's a better one, but I'm a mom of 5 and I have mom brain, so forgive my my fake words. Anyways, I really enjoyed that side of Calvinism. They had rich, poetic writings. The Puritans, I loved reading the Puritan paperbacks. I loved reading John Calvin. I loved reading about Luther because I felt a connection to Luther. I felt like we were brothers and sisters. Like I felt like I knew him. We moved from Houston back to Jacksonville, Florida. And my husband we become Reformed Baptist. He is ordained in that church as a minister for the Baptist church. And they encourage us to read a lot of Presbyterian material. And we're noticing really quickly that we're starting to change our mind on baptism. We're starting to see it more in the eyes of a Presbyterian lens, which is you need to baptize your children. And there's a different understanding of covenants and how God works and what the waters of baptism are for. And so we kind of shifted. And it turned out to be a difficult move because our friends felt betrayed. My husband, he had to tell them he didn't, he's not going to be a minister in their church anymore. And he wasn't the head pastor, he was an elder there. But that was big for them. That was important. It was very important to them, the structure of their church and their congregation. And so they took it as kind of like we betrayed them. So that was hard. But then we became Presbyterians. And we entered this church. And the church was so kind and gracious. They loved us. Our family integrated well. And they saw that my husband, he quit being a Baptist pastor. He had moved into a different profession. And they decided that they wanted him to come on staff at the church. So they employed him and then also offered him they paid for him to go to seminary. Well, mind you, this is a process of we were Reformed Baptist for about 3 or 4 years. And then we moved to Presbyterianism. And so the time period of being a Calvinist at this point, up until my husband is in seminary, is about 7 or 8 years. So, going back, during the whole time of being a Calvinist, I'm wrestling with all these huge theological ideas and thoughts. And I'm always on this quest to figure out and come to peace and terms with the problem of evil. And how is this not contradicting what we know about God? And Calvinists are very good about using the scriptures to make their theology make sense. And so they would turn to passages like Romans 9 and all of these other passages of God's sovereignty and working in the lives of people. Us as Catholics call it providence. They also call it providence. They just mean something different by it. And, they're just kind of describing away, theologizing away this apparent contradiction. And they chalk it up to, it's just a mystery. Our minds cannot fathom how these two things go together. But God is ultimately sovereign. God determines all evil. He determined the fall of Adam. And he determines salvation and damnation. And it's all for this. They think that it's for the glory of God. That everything that happens, even all of the evil, is to bring glory to God. So I entered the same internal hell, if you will, of just constantly scrutinizing this problem of evil. And then to top it all off, as you are reading all of this theology, as you are reading this rich material, you find that there is actually a category of people who think that they are elect, who have all of the fruits of being a follower of Jesus Christ. They themselves, they're self-deceived. They think that they love God. They think that they are a Christian, only to find out that when they die, that they are actually damned. And God gives them a more intense punishment because they had the truth and they didn't really believe it. Even though in the Calvinist system, it's only possible to do that if God does it for you. And so, who can escape that kind of hell? Because now, as an independent Baptist, I could do something about it. I could go pray the prayer again. I could have at least some sense of temporary peace if I go and be sincere in my prayer to Jesus again. The opportunity was always there. Whereas within Calvinism, you can never know. How can I know if I'm self-deceived? I can't. That's part and parcel of the Calvinist system is you can't know. And there's nothing you can do about it. Your will is not involved at all. And you just have to live within this tension of mystery and doubts. I came to a point within this time that we were Presbyterian. I just stopped reading theology. I stopped thinking about God. I stopped catechizing my children because when I would catechize them, the answers that the catechism gives for all of these questions would drive me insane because I couldn't square it in my own mind. It was a contradiction. God seemed evil because he's the cause of all evil. And to top all of that off with, you have the theory of the atonement of penal substitution, where Jesus is taking the wrath of God, and mix that in with imputed righteousness and forensic justification. I felt as if there had to be more. There had to be more than just, God can't look at me because I'm so depraved and disgusting. That he had to pour all the wrath out, get his vengeance out on Jesus just so he could, love me. And then after all of that, after Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, now God still can't look at me. That's why Jesus died. And in the Protestant mind, even in Baptist mind, because they still hold to imputed righteousness and forensic justification, all of that still, God cannot look at me. He's looking at Jesus. It's this very strange idea that God isn't actually seeing you. He's seeing Christ. When he looks at you, he doesn't see your sin. He sees Jesus and what Jesus did for you. And I know this exists within Calvinism, within Protestantism, that there should be an internal change, that Christ should be changing you from, ontologically. But it is less talked about. It's less emphasized than the actual forensic understanding that they have, which is that you are made right with God, but not in a real ontological sense. It's just a legal fiction. God now declares you to be something that you're not really that. He's just declaring it on your account, and now you have all of Jesus' righteousness given to you, kind of like in a bank account. It's all poured in. But there's no real ontological change. This was one of the foundational disagreements within the Reformation, is that as Catholics, we believe that at justification, grace is infused into us. It ontologically changes us in that process. And justification and sanctification and glorification are all seen as one broader picture of justification. We do not separate it in the way that Protestants do. And so I'm struggling. There has to be more. Because I'm starting to blame my sin on God. If I'm failing in a certain area, if I'm not acting in accordance with God's will, I'm starting to say, well, that is God's will. Ultimately, if God is sovereign over every decision that I make, if he's making these decisions for me, if he's determined what I'm going to do, then my sin is just a part of his bigger plan to work all things together for good. And anybody that is logically and critically thinking about these things can hear that and say, what? That makes no sense. And trust me, I know, because I lived within this contradicting world for many years. So that's where I found myself. And I dared not voice this to anyone because I was very afraid that if I actually spoke what I actually felt and was struggling with to the world, to my husband, to those around me, that would seal my fate as being a reprobate. How could I question God? That's used a lot in Calvinist circles. Romans 9. Who are you, O man, to question God? And I'm not saying we have a right to question God for real. But in that system, I think it's absolutely critical and right to question their version of God, because it's inconsistent with a huge portion of the text of Scripture, not to mention historic Christianity. It's in tension with that as well. And so I'm just living in my own personal hell of scrupulosity. My husband's on his way to become a Presbyterian minister. He's in seminary. This is his dream. This is his vocation. This is our life depends on it. This is our livelihood. So I had a lot of pressure, a lot of weight on my shoulders to figure this out, to just get myself under control and figure it out for the sake of my husband, for the sake of my family. And right around this time, a friend posted a video by an Orthodox priest, and it was titled Rock and Sand. You can find it on YouTube. And I clicked the link. And I sit and I watch for, I think it's like an hour long. I sit and I watch and I listen. And for a whole hour, this Orthodox priest is obliterating my whole entire view of the Reformation. And it plants all of these seeds of, what is Sola Scriptura? What is the early church? This man is telling me that they have apostolic succession and they have the traditions of the apostles passed down for the last 2,000 years. And I'm thinking, what? I thought I had the faith of the early church. That is the whole entire premise of the Reformation, is that we went back, we discovered the early church, and we have the pure doctrine of the early church. I heard that in so many sermons. I read that online so many times by friends that are Reformed. We went back, we saved the church from the clutches of the satanic, Antichrist, Roman Catholic Church, and we are the early church. This is what the early church believed. And I depended heavily on St. Augustine because, that is part of the Reformation, is we rely heavily on some of his theology for what we believe in for what we believed in Calvinism. And so I'm just listening, and I'm thinking, how is this possible? How have I never heard of Eastern Orthodox? And what is this that I'm hearing? And so I show it to my husband, and he watches it, and he's like, I've never heard of this. I don't know anything about it. And I asked him, Father Josiah Trinum actually wrote a book called Rock and Sand. That was what the video on YouTube is going over, his book. And so I asked him, can I read this book? And he said yes. And so I think he was hoping I would read it and I would assume that it's wrong and, be fine. But I read it. And that sent me down the rabbit hole of studying church history, of studying the rich theology of the early church fathers, something I had no idea existed as a Protestant. I thought, all of those writings had been lost. I was so disconnected from early Christianity. Anything from before the Reformation, I had absolutely no clue about. I was ignorant of it completely. And so I'm reading the Fathers. I'm listening to Orthodox podcasts. My favorite was Lord of Spirits. And I'm starting to realize that everything, my whole worldview, everything I've believed in for the last 9 years, and even my whole life, because, every sect of Protestantism flows from the Reformation. And they all pretty much have the same view that we're the early church. Everybody claims they're the early church. And so I'm reading, and I actually go to the sources themselves. I'm reading the early fathers. And I quickly realize this doesn't look anything like my Baptist church. This doesn't look anything like my Protestant Presbyterian church. This doesn't look like Calvinism. They're arguing against my principles and ideas as a Calvinist as being Gnostic. And the first thing that I grasped onto that really drew me in to wanting this to be true is the doctrine of the Eucharist, the understanding that it is the real, true presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, and that it's the medicine of immortality, that it actually produces an ontological change. It was less of this legalistic understanding of salvation and a more healing view of what salvation actually is. And it made so much more sense, logically, consistently. It made the world seem coherent and beautiful and wonderful and true. And I was just being drawn in to the beauty of the theology of the Eucharist. I wanted it so badly. And if I'm wrong, if my Presbyterian church is wrong about the Eucharist, if all of the Protestants are wrong about the Eucharist, then my only option is Eastern Orthodoxy or Catholicism. Now, because of the prejudice that I was brought up in, if you're an American, you are pretty much raised, if you're raised Protestant, you're raised to believe that Catholicism is evil. And Eastern Orthodox, they don't like Catholics either. And so it was very easy to just kind of jump into Eastern Orthodoxy and devour Eastern Orthodoxy and keep my prejudice against the Catholic Church. But as I'm trying to understand all of this new theology, I am quickly realizing that they don't have a lot of answers or questions, really. They don't have the same disagreements as Catholics and Protestants. And I'm trying to bring questions to my husband. And so I kind of need more of that side. So I start listening to Catholic apologists during this time as well. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to be Catholic, it was that they had the questions and answers, and they dealt with these theological differences with Protestants historically. And so I found myself listening to Joe Heschmeyer, Keith Nestor, Pints with Aquinas, Dr. Scott Hahn. I'm like reading Dr. Scott Hahn's books. And I'm starting to really drop the criticism and the prejudices that I have of the Catholic Church during this time. Now, don't get me wrong, I still loved Eastern Orthodoxy. I really wanted to be Eastern Orthodox. But I'm starting to realize their position, and it's not all of Eastern Orthodoxy's position, but a lot of them do have this. They believe that the Catholic Church, that when they had the schism in 1054, that the Catholic Church no longer has valid sacraments. They are in schism, they're not a valid church. I started to realize that just can't be true. It's logically impossible. You can't look at what the Catholic Church has done for the last 1,000 years and the fruit of all of the good fruit that has come from the Catholic Church. You can't say that Christ is not there, that they don't have valid sacraments. And so that started to drop for me. I started to drop that kind of mindset. So I'm bringing my husband these questions, and it's causing a lot of problems in my marriage. Like, he does not want to talk about this with me. I'm trying to, in his mind, he thinks it's going to sabotage everything, which technically it would. It wasn't personal, though. I wasn't trying to ruin his life, if you will. And he knew that, but at the same time, there was just too much tension between us. He really wanted me to stop asking questions. And so for 6 months, I was nonstop just kind of nudging him. What about this? What about this? What about this? And at this point, I'm just an annoyance to him. And so I reached out because you got to remember, I can't talk to anybody about this. This is all my own internal struggle. I'm terrified to reach out to anyone with my real identity because I don't want anybody to find out and fire my husband, and then, and I'm to blame for that. I didn't want the weight of that to be on my shoulders. I knew that he had to make the decision on his own. I didn't want that. I didn't want resentment from my best friend, because my husband is my best friend. We have an amazing relationship. Not all people share that. I didn't want there to be anything that could cause I didn't want there to be a break with what I had. Now, don't get me wrong, for a period of 2 years during this whole process of me asking these questions, it was the hardest time in my marriage. I didn't have my best friend, and he didn't have his best friend, because we were at odds, because I embraced that Calvinism was wrong. I can genuinely say that during this time, for the first time in my entire life, I knew God loved me. I no longer was struggling with those questions. I knew that I wanted to follow Christ, and I knew that he wanted me to follow him. And it was this beautiful, gracious time in my life where I know that God just poured his love into me in a way that I can't explain. There's no scientific, logical explanation for it. It was a supernatural outpouring of God's love, and me just feeling engulfed and just overwhelmed with the fact that I knew without a doubt that God loved me, that he had a church that was meant to help me in my path to salvation, that he had given his body for me for all time in the Eucharist. All of the beautiful things about Orthodoxy and Catholicism, all of those true things, they just overwhelmed me with the sense of truth and beauty and goodness. And so I had embraced it all. I embraced it in my mind. I embraced it in my heart. And at this point, I'm just trying to get my husband to come along. Like, come on, it's beautiful. Come see this thing that I have found. And so, excuse me, I didn't think I was going to get emotional today, but I am. I just wanted him to experience this because I knew it was true. And of course, you want your best friend to believe and know what is true. And so I came to a place where I just said, I have to stop questioning my husband. I reached out to 2 Orthodox priests anonymously, again, because I'm terrified for anybody to know who I am. I also reached out to an Orthodox woman, Frederica Matthews Green, anonymously, and we conversed for a little while about my situation. And her husband is a priest, and she also actually gave me advice from him. And so I'm getting advice from this priest, and then also Father Stephen Damick. Was it DeYoung? No, I think it was Damick. Father Stephen Damick. I reached out to them anonymously. I told them my situation, asked them what I should do, because I am so ready to be Orthodox or Catholic. And they told me to pray, to stop questioning my husband, and to just pray. So that's what I did. I just started praying for my husband. I asked God, and I actually prayed to our Blessed Mother, that she would bring people into my husband's life that would be able to discuss these things and debate with him where it wasn't causing problems between me and him. And so I didn't know this at the time, but while I'm praying, he is actually in a group, in all these groups, because I brought him all these questions. He's gotten himself into all these groups, and he's debating these things. And he's also in seminary where he's having to study early church history and read all of these early church fathers. And so he's starting his own journey. And I have a video of his testimony on here as well. You can feel free to go watch that. But so he's starting his own journey, and I had no idea. And one day he just comes to me and he says, I've got vacation. We're going to go visit a Catholic Mass. What? What do you mean we're going to go visit a Catholic Mass? I thought you hated Catholics. I thought you didn't want me to be questioning anymore. And he tells me, he's been debating these things and he's struggling and he doesn't believe half of what he used to believe, and he doesn't know what to believe anymore. And he just needs to go to Mass and see what it is. He takes me to the Basilica in Jacksonville, Florida. It's called the Immaculate Conception. And for 2 people who had never been in a Catholic church, been in a Catholic Mass, always been told that they worship Satan and they worship idols. We walked into this sanctuary, and there's angels to the sky, statues of angels, and there's the pictures in the stained glass of the Passion of our Lord. And all of the church fathers are painted up all over the walls. Like all of these biblical early church things, all everywhere for our eyes to see. And it's quiet. People are praying silently in the pews. And tears just began to flow from me because I'm thinking, what is happening? Am I finally going to be able to be Catholic? And not only that, but this is holy. I've never experienced a tangible means of holiness. It was in the air, if you will. Literally, when they did the incense, I could say it was in the air. But the atmosphere was so heavy with the presence of God and with this sense of holiness and awe that I just broke down into tears. My husband is looking at me and he's like, what? And so we just sit there, we go through Mass, the priest gives a homily. I couldn't tell you what it's on. They've got the incense, they do the sacrifice of the Mass. And we get out of Mass, and we just sit in the car. And it's just quiet. Just absolutely, completely quiet. And my husband turns to me and he says, what have I been doing my whole life? How have I missed out on this my whole life? Because you have to remember, even though he agreed with Calvinism and he was ready to be a Presbyterian pastor, we had already been kind of shifting our focus on some issues before I started this conversion journey. Embracing a more robust understanding of the Eucharist. Embracing a different understanding of what baptism is, because a lot of the reformers did believe in baptismal regeneration. And what does that mean for a modern Calvinist? How does that flow into our theology, which is regeneration happens before you can even profess faith in Christ? And so he had already embraced some of these ideas, and he was also longing for something deeper and something richer. And it was just, everything fell together beautifully with the theology of the fathers, with the history of the Catholic Church. And, for us, the main thing I think about being Catholic was the Eucharist. I think we can both unequivocally say that. This understanding that Christ is really there. And also, apostolic succession and Sola Scriptura. Sola Scriptura doesn't work. We have lived our whole lives under the umbrella of Sola Scriptura, and all it has caused is schism and fracture. Everybody teaches what they believe using the pages of Scripture. So how can everybody be right? It just does not work. It's not coherent. And then this understanding of apostolic succession, that the keys are being passed down continually, ages through ages, that Christ has never forsaken his church. There is always this visible institution where we can know that this is the church. In Protestantism, we have this idea that the church is not visible in the sense that there's just one visible church. They think they put an emphasis on this thing called the invisible church, which is all of the true Christians. Those are the church. Those people are the church. And so they really have lost this understanding that there should be a visible church. One holy Catholic apostolic church. Not thousands of different visible churches that absolutely do not agree with each other on anything. Even the color of their carpet they can't agree on, or which hymnal, the red one or the blue one. So, this understanding that the church is visible, it's always been visible, it will always be visible. And in order to have that, you have to have a supernatural working of the Spirit, because that's impossible. It is humanly impossible for an institution to last for 2,000 years. Now, granted, I'm not saying there's never been scandal, there's never been dark history within the church. That's always going to be the case. There's always going to be scandal. There's always going to be wolves who come into the flock. But only God could preserve his visible institution of the church, especially with all of the scandal and especially with all of the attempts by Satan to overthrow the church. It's just not possible. And so, all of that to say, I became Catholic. First of all, I was leaning Eastern Orthodox. Let me clarify. I didn't go over this, but I accepted Catholicism in great part due to my husband, because I was still on the fence. I knew that I didn't believe that the Catholics didn't have sacraments. I knew that I had already shifted my perception that they were a true church as well. And because I had listened to things like Pints with Aquinas, all of the conversion stories he has on there, which they're really beautiful, they really helped me during my process because I couldn't talk to anybody. And so it was really, really helpful and honestly therapeutic to be able to listen to somebody else walking the path that I was currently walking in. And it would give me such comfort. Like, I'm really not alone. I know I feel really alone in this, but I'm not alone. So I love conversion stories, and I in particularly loved conversion stories when I was going through this whole process. But so I had already shifted from wanting to be, or thinking that the Catholic Church was not a visible church. I already believed that there's two churches, the East and the West. I wasn't sure about the papacy. I really didn't study that a lot. But when my husband jumped on board, and he started really diving into the papacy, and so did I. And so we started reading some books. Joe Heschmeyer has a book called Pope Peter, and that really just nailed the nail into the coffin. Like, that sealed it. There's undeniable proof for me, historically and biblically, for the See of Rome to have primacy, to be the head of the church, to be able to speak authoritatively when there's confusion, when there is disagreement between local churches. I just couldn't deny the historical fact of the papacy. And so we became Catholic. Now, the last conversion video, I had not become Catholic yet. Like, I had not been brought into the church yet. But now I'm a Catholic. And I can honestly say that it's been the best. Is it difficult? 100%. Absolutely. It's hard to be a Catholic. It's hard to face... Mom Judy called. Had a poopy diaper. Anyways, being a Catholic is wonderful. I am so happy to be Catholic. We have a wonderful priest, a wonderful parish, but I won't lie, it has been difficult. I have faced losing friends. I have faced having my own family. My own parents have disowned me, cut me off. They think I worship Satan, worship idols. And it's difficult having to deal with facing the prejudice against Catholics, particularly in this country. Just having the fullness, the objective truth has been wonderful. It's worth every cross. It's worth every trial. It's worth all of the rejection that I have faced since becoming Catholic. Because I have peace in my heart that there is objective truth, that there is a place I can go and receive healing from my sinful ways, that grace is genuinely changing me ontologically, and that Jesus is truly present in his church, that he's always there. Our church has adoration every single day. I know there's a place in the world for me to go, and I can just sit with Jesus. And that is a wonderful reality to live in. God is in the world. He's not up in heaven, and we're not all just waiting for him to come down or waiting to go up to him. There is a reality in which Jesus is here on earth still, and he's in the Catholic Church, and I think he's in the Orthodox Church, and that is the only reality worth living. It's the only reality that is objectively true and good and beautiful. Now, am I saying, Protestants, that there's no truth and there's no beauty and there's no goodness in Protestantism? No, I'm not saying that. But I am saying objectively that the fullness of the truth is more beautiful. Let me just put it that way. It is more wonderful, more amazing. I just can't explain it. There's no words to explain it. And I guess a good analogy would be that in Protestantism, there are truths, beautiful truths about Christ from his word. There's beautiful things in Protestantism. Because, again, beauty and truth are objective. And so Protestants have held on to a lot of these beautiful things. So there's flowers, there are roses scattered. You know, you've got individual roses within the Protestant churches. But the full dozen, 2 dozen beautiful bouquet, that's in the Catholic Church. That's in the Eastern Orthodox Church. They have a few less than us. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. Kind of. Anyways, I love my Orthodox brothers and sisters. I love my Protestant brothers and sisters. But I especially love my Catholic faith. And I want everybody to know it. I want everybody to see it for what it is. I want everybody to participate in it. I want everybody to be a part of it. And I want everybody to just experience what I have experienced. And that is the purpose of this channel. That is the purpose I make these videos. It's really difficult to put yourself in front of a camera. And I make myself do it every single time. I am an introvert. If you know me in real life, I am an introvert. I don't do small talk. I struggle with speaking. And so it's been a real challenge to get in front of a camera and do this. But I initially made this channel because I couldn't talk to anybody. And when I could finally tell the world, I thought, I have to do this. I have to be able to express all of these things. Because for 2 years I lived without being able to express anything for fear and for, not causing problems in my marriage. And so it has been a beautiful way for me to just get it all out. Just tell the world, my 100 views, the world is my little small audience, but just tell the world how beautiful Catholicism is, how beautiful truth is. And yeah, that's the purpose of this channel. And I hope that this was a blessing to you. And if you like this content, please like and subscribe, comment, do all the things. YouTube, for some reason, I only have 100 views on my last video. And that is not typical for this channel. So if you don't mind, do all the YouTube things. They love it. They reward it. And I would appreciate it. I hope you all have a very blessed day.